All right, so we've got these one-step equations. And I talk about this with my algebra students all the time. Nicholas? I talk about this with my algebra students all the time. Mathematicians are not a creative group of people. When you get to algebra, you'll learn about this formula that's called point-slope formula. And in order to do point-slope formula, you have to have a point and you have to have slope. Then you'll learn about this thing called the y-intercept. And the y-intercept is where something intercepts, crosses the y. And then you'll learn about slope-intercept form. And guess what you need for slope-intercept form? You need a slope and you need intercept, right? These things don't make sense to us now, but mathematicians, the names of things are very simple. They do exactly what they're supposed to say. So one-step equations are done, finished, complete in one step. If you have to do two things to solve the problem, it's not a one-step. You only have to do one thing because it's a one-step. A two-step equation requires two steps. A multi-step equation requires multiple steps, 3 or more. And to do one-step equations, you need to know something that's called inverse operations. Inverse operations. And inverse operations, Gabe, you need to calm down, please, are operations that are opposite. They undo each other. And you already know these. This is that thing that I was talking about. Lots of today's lesson is common sense type math. Inverse operations are operations that are opposite. They undo each other. So if your problem is an addition problem, what are you going to do that's the opposite? Subtract. If it's an addition problem, you're going to subtract. If it's a subtraction problem, what are you going to do to undo that? Add. They're opposites of each other. What if it's a multiplication problem? If it's a multiply problem, you're going to divide. And if it's a divide problem, you're going to multiply. That's pretty basic stuff, right? I mean, common sense. What's the opposite of multiplying by 2? Dividing by 2. What's the opposite of subtracting 8? Adding 8. Here's a trick question. What's the opposite of subtracting negative 3?
Adding 3. And subtracting 3. Adding negative 3.
Just change the operation. don't change the number.
Adding 3.
If it's subtracting negative 3, what's the opposite of subtracting negative 3? Adding negative 3.
So plus minus 3. Plus minus 3.
Now, you then use your operations, like the rules that we've learned, to figure it out. But like if it's multiplied by negative 2, what's the opposite of multiplying by negative 2? Dividing by negative 2. Don't change the value of the number, only change the sign. Now I get it, minus and negative doesn't exist, right? We can't do minus and negative. We change that. But if it was there, you only change the operation. Do not change the sign. Here are a few extras. Here are a few that aren't necessarily always as common sense. If something is squared, meaning it has an exponent of 2, what's the inverse or the opposite? What do you do to undo a square? Not close. Not dividing is close. Olivia? Not close. I get what you're thinking. Remember that sign when we were doing irrational and rational numbers? If it was, 8 squared is 64, how do you undo that? The square root of 64 is 8. Here's another one that you might not. If something is cubed, meaning it's got an exponent of 3, the inverse is cube root, which is the square root with a 3 in front. The cube root button you accidentally almost use all the time. See above right here, the squared, there's the square root sign. Right above it is the cube root sign. So if I wanted to do the cube root, see how there's a 3 in front? If I did the cube root, I want a number in front, right? So I want to put 3. The cube root of 125 means what times itself times itself 3 times. 5 times 5 times 5 is 125. You won't use these very often, but you need to have that list just in case. All right, here are the rules. Here are the rules or the steps to follow. Now I get it. A lot of the common sense happens that these rules aren't necessarily going to be followed all the time with one-step equations. But when we get into two-step equations and when we get into multi-step equations, these rules are super important. Okay, super important. So let's practice them now. The first step, draw a line down the equal sign. Draw a line down the equal sign. Two. Find the variable. Find the variable. Step 3. Circle the constant or draw a square, a box, the coefficient. And you know what? We happen to know what is the constant and what is a coefficient. Constant and coefficient, Cody. Perfect. A constant is a number with no variable. A coefficient is the number in front of the variable. You only do one. Or. Well, either there is a constant, so you circle it, or there's not. And if there's not a constant, that means there's a coefficient, so you draw a square around it. Then we use inverse operations to move the number across the equal sign. And then number 5 is check it. Ready? Prison practice. Write down the problem. Negative 15 plus n equals 13.1. Negative 15 plus n equals 13.1. Who can tell me step number 1? What is it, BB? Perfect. Draw a line down the equal sign. Here's my line, or my equal sign. Here's my line. That was easy, right? Step number 2. What's step number 2? Morgan. Find the variable. Found it. That was easy. Step number 3. What's step number 3? Camden. Or Caden, sorry.
Draw a circle around a constant.
Or,
Square
so I look. Here's my n. It's my variable. Is there a constant or a coefficient?
Stop saying constant.
It's a constant. He's right. Technically speaking, Sam, there is a coefficient there, isn't there? There's a 1 that's touching it, but it's hiding, so we don't really care. It's a constant. It's a plus or minus number. It's not touching that n. It's not right up next to it. All right. Here we go. Here is our one step. You do one thing to solve this problem. Use inverse operations to move the number across the equal sign. Because we're combining like terms, right? These numbers need to go together, but I have to cross the equal sign. So I have to do the opposite. So I'm going to move this number I circled. I'm going to move this negative 15. What's the opposite of negative 15? Positive 15 or plus 15. Negative 15 and positive 15 are opposites. They cancel out. And I'm left with n equals, what's 13.1 plus 15? 28.1. There's your answer. Step 5. Check it. So let's see. Negative 15 plus, and then instead of n, my answer was 28.1. And when I press enter, does it work?
Yay! Find the variable. Finally, third grade.
We did it. Let's try another one.
I mean, like from third grade, they were like, you don't need to find out. You don't need it. You don't need it. Because they were just saying, like, you don't need the variable. You just don't.
Negative or 14b equals negative 56. B equals negative 56. Step 1, draw a line. Done. Step 2, find the variable. Done.
The whole time, instead of drawing like D's and B's, or D's, I've been drawing B's instead, so I have to keep correcting it when you did a B. So,
Step 2 or step 3. Am I going to circle or am I going to draw a square? Because this is a coefficient, correct? All right, here comes the part that we're ready for. Here's our one step. Use inverse operations to move the number across the equal sign. What's my operation? Multiply. What's the inverse? Divide by 14. Divide by 14. Those are opposites, so they cancel out. I get B equals negative 56 divided by 14. Negative 4. Shh, don't worry about it. Focus. Let's check it. Use our calculator. So that means 14 times negative 4. And I should get negative 56 as my answer. And I do. Ladies and gentlemen, if you check your answer, you should never get a problem wrong when you turn in an assignment. Because if it doesn't equal negative 56, I did something wrong and I should check my work. Negative 6.1 equals r over 40 or 88.4. Sorry, that was a hard problem for me to read. Negative 6.1 equals r over 8.4. Draw a line down the equal sign. Find the variable. Am I going to draw a circle for a constant, or am I going to draw a square for a coefficient? Does it say plus or minus? No. It doesn't say plus or minus. That's called a coefficient. It's touching the letter R. So let's go. Inverse operations. What operation is over here? Division. So what's the opposite? So I use my calculator, or you can do it long style. Negative 6.1 times 8.4. Negative 51.24 equals, those canceled out because they're opposites of each other, right? Dividing by 8.4 is the opposite of timesing by 8.4, so they go away and I'm left with R. I can check it. Instead of the letter R, I'm going to substitute negative 51.24, and I'm going to divide by 8.4. Did it work? All right, let's try this one.
You guys said yay, they said no. That was perfect. That was scary. She was like, yeah. That was like the best.
What if you had this problem? 4x, or 4 plus x equals 10. Is this one that you should show all of these steps, or is this common sense? This one's common sense, right? 4 plus what equals 10? 6. Okay, so here's what you need to know. These are the changes. These are the things that you have to do algebraically. Listen. Your answer must be written variable equals and then your solution. You have to get into that habit. If you're solving for a variable, you must write n equals 28.1. You cannot just say the answer is 28.1. There are even some algebra teachers out there that'll say this right here. Cody, turn around. Negative 51.24 equals R is not an acceptable answer. They're going to tell you you need to say R equals negative 51.24. The rule is variable first. Just like we did all those questions like, is 10 minus 2x correct? I mean, yeah, but what's a better way of writing 10 minus 2x? Negative 2x plus 10. This is better. Variable should always be first.